Mulch is one of the best things you can add to your garden and landscape. It has amazing benefits, but not everybody knows what those benefits are and how to use it or even what it is. Today, I'm going to work to help alleviate some of that uncertainty. So join me as I discuss mulch. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and let's begin to clear up some of the confusion by talking about what mulch is. It's simply anything that you put on top of your soil. It's often confused with things like compost. Compost is a soil amendment. Typically, you mix it into the soil. But if you take that same compost and put it on top of your soil, well, now it becomes a mulch. All mulches fall into two basic categories. They're either organic mulch or inorganic mulch. Organic mulches at some point were alive. They were some type of plant. So bark and wood chips are organic mulches. Straw and leaves are organic mulches. On the other side are the things that were never alive, and those are the inorganic mulches. Things like gravel and rock and rubber and even plastic can all be used as a mulch, but they're inorganic. Now that we know what mulch is, we can begin to talk about why it's so magical in the garden and landscape, because of the many, many things that it does to improve your garden. One of the primary reasons why I use mulch, particularly a thicker bark mulch like this one in my landscape, is because it helps retain soil moisture. And because I live in a pretty dry environment, anywhere that you have the bare soil exposed to the sun in the summer, this is going to dry out pretty quickly. But if you cover it with mulch, and that's organic or inorganic, it's going to help hold in some of that soil moisture. It reduces evaporation due to dry air and the sun. One of the best things about mulch is that it reduces weeds. In fact, in some cases, it virtually eliminates weeds. I've got the same shredded bark mulch in this area, along with some of the leaves that I've just let stay in place as a mulch. It's early spring, but there's no weeds popping up. This area is very clear because the mulch has kept any weed seeds from sprouting. As I look through the whole area, I only see one weed that's beginning to grow, and that's easy to deal with. If you want to reduce your weeding, put mulch in your landscape. The anti-weed benefit of mulch is quite evident in this area of my landscape. I have this working path that I haven't mulched yet. It's just bare soil. And you can see that all of the weeds that have popped up in this area are right here on the border where they're exposed to bare soil and very little mulch. Contrast that with the established area where there's a lot of mulch and the perennial plants are starting to pop up, but there's no weeds to be seen anywhere. Mulch is also a great way to reduce damage to your trees and ornamental shrubs. I have mulch in this whole area, but imagine this were lawn and I have a tree growing in the middle of my lawn. If the grass is growing all the way up to the tree, well, every time I mow the lawn or if I get my weed eater out, I run the risk of damaging the trunk of the tree. But if I have just a small amount of mulch around the tree, around the trunk, now I don't have to worry about running into it with the lawnmower. Zero risk of damage by using mulch around your important growing plants. In many areas of the world, the difference between the daytime temperatures and the nighttime temperatures can be quite dramatic, especially now in early spring, where we might have a 30 or 40 degree difference between day and night. The mulch helps moderate the soil temperature. It's kind of like a blanket. When it gets warm out during the day, the whole area warms up. At night, if it gets really cold or you have a snow or unexpected freeze, well, this mulch acts as a protective barrier to the soil. So the soil's able to retain some of that heat to protect the plants that are starting to grow. The opposite holds true in the summer, where we may have those same 30 or 40 degree temperature differences. In the nighttime, everything starts to cool down, and this mulch now acts as a blanket again, but this time it helps keep the soil cool when the daytime temperatures rise dramatically. Now, there is going to be a shift in the soil temperature between those highest highs and those lowest lows, but the mulch helps moderate it so that it stays relatively even for all the plants that are growing. One of the worst things for your soil is compaction. Compacted soil is bad for plants because the roots just can't grow through it as well. Compacted soil means typically stunted plants. Loose soil means a happy plant. And guess what reduces soil compaction? Mulch. Now, I don't recommend walking in your garden any more than you have to. But if you have to get in your garden to shoot a video or pull weeds or put more plants in, mulch reduces the compaction that every single footstep causes. It's like an extra springy mattress on top of the soil. Every time you step on it, it's the mulch that compacts, not the soil underneath. And with the wind and the rain, the mulch will gradually loosen back up again. But the soil underneath is less compacted. Mulch can also add to the beauty of your landscape. Now, this is entirely subjective, but if you use a nice bark mulch or even a decorative rock mulch, it can really accent the growth of a lot of your plants, your trees, your shrubs. So consider mulch as a way to bring another element into your landscape design based on the size of the mulch, the color of the mulch, and the texture of the mulch. You really may gain something. One of the main reasons that I primarily use organic mulches is because an organic mulch improves the soil. Just like you would add compost as that soil amendment to improve the soil, well, compost is just decomposed organic matter. This mulch that's organic will gradually decompose and in essence become compost and an amendment for the soil. So with the work of the earthworms and the beetles and the bacteria and the fungus, all of this organic mulch will break down and all of those nutrients will benefit the soil. That also means that you need to add more organic mulch periodically as it breaks down. But it also means that you don't need to add any soil amendments to improve the soil in an established landscape. You just add organic mulch and let nature take over, and your soil will be much, much better. I'm a huge advocate of organic mulches, but I do think inorganic mulch serves a purpose. Underneath pine trees, it's almost impossible to get anything to grow. And this is my neighbor's yard. She's decided to use a rock mulch in this area of her landscape where nothing will grow underneath these established trees. Inorganic mulch is a great option if you have trouble growing in an area like this. I use inorganic mulch in a few sections of my garden. I use it in areas where the plants prefer a really good draining soil and even like hot conditions. So around the plants like these hens and chicks, I use a mulch, but it's inorganic. It's gravel. In the vegetable garden, I mulch all of my plants once they get established. I like to use a straw mulch. It's inexpensive, it's easy to spread, it stays in place, and it adds all of those benefits that I've already discussed. But there's another important benefit that mulch in the garden adds, especially for tomato plants. If you think of bare soil as a trampoline, when the rain falls, it bounces right back up, or when you water, it bounces right back up. Well, every time a water drop bounces back off of the soil, it can take with it fungal spores and bacteria. And if that bounces back onto the leaves of your plant, it can potentially become infected. And that can be especially bad for tomatoes that are susceptible to a lot of soil-borne pathogens. Now, you throw some mulch, even simple straw, and you eliminate that trampoline effect. When it rains or when you water, there is no bounce back from the soil. And you've greatly reduced the risk of disease in your garden plants. Now, you're probably becoming convinced that mulch really is something you should be using if you're not using it already, or maybe using more than you're using right now. And you're probably wondering, well, what type of mulch should I be using? I've already given a couple examples, but there are many more options out there. And often it comes down to your personal preference, or maybe the way you garden. Because those that like to practice using the Ruth Stout method use hay almost exclusively as their mulch. If you're doing back to Eden, you're using wood chips. Me, in my garden, I use straw. I also use a lot of leaves. And I'll purchase the shredded bark mulch in my established landscape. If you're establishing a xeriscape and you want a relatively native look that stays warm and has good drainage, well, then you'll probably use a gravel or a rock. If you want something where nothing grows in your landscape, well, that's where plastic and rubber come in. So there's lots of options, and it really comes down to where you're going to use the mulch and how you're going to use the mulch. Just try to decide, first of all, do you want organic mulch or do you want inorganic mulch? And I recommend that you try to keep those separate, because if you start with an inorganic mulch like gravel or rock and then change your mind, it can be very difficult to remove all of those rocks and then add the organic mulch later. So do take some time, do think about how long the mulch is going to be there, and then focus in on whether it's for the beauty or for the weeds or for the benefit of the soil. And that might help you decide. There is no single answer to which mulch is best, especially for you, because your garden is different than my garden. One thing to consider is where you live and what type of organic mulch is available to you. In this area, I've got a lot of pine straw, pine needle availability just from my neighbor if I want to use that as a mulch. If I want to purchase a mulch that typically it's going to be a cedar mulch. Well, that's going to be much different than another part of the country where maybe their bark mulch is a cypress mulch. It really doesn't matter which type you have, but be aware that if you're looking for a specific type of mulch, you might not be able to find it unless you have to order it and have it delivered. Another factor is how natural do you want your landscape to be. Some of those dyed mulches, like the reds and the blacks and all the other colors that are offered, well, maybe you might have a problem with the type of dye they use. So you want a much more natural type of mulch. You also need to think about the weather. If you've got a lot of rain in your area, you might want to avoid some of those heavier bark mulches, because even though they might be big chunks, they tend to float. So in a heavy rain, all your mulch floats away. If you live in an area like mine, where you've got a lot of wind, that's why I go with the shredded bark, because it tends to stay in place. If I were to use anything lighter than that, it would probably blow away. Cost is another important factor to consider. If you can get the free pine needles from your neighbor and that's what you want to use, go for it. Grass is a great free mulch that many people have access to. A problem with grass, though, is I don't recommend using that all by itself, because it has a tendency to mat together, become quite compacted, and then water actually can't seep through it. Have you ever cleaned the bottom of your lawnmower and you scrape off those big chunks that are as hard as rock? You don't want that on your soil. So when I use grass, I'll usually mix it with leaves, and I most often use it in my vegetable garden. I've pointed out a few ways of using inorganic mulches in your garden, but they can be expensive, often more expensive than organic mulches. But they do last for a long time, virtually forever. Where you have to continue to replenish those organic mulches, a mulch like rock will stay there for as long as you want it to be there. It doesn't work as well at defeating weeds, because over time dust will blow into those crevices and there's lots of oxygen and weeds will sprout between your rocks. But it is a viable option. I'm not a huge fan of the rubber mulches, the ones where they take old tires and grind them up. I think it really runs the risk of introducing all those chemicals into your soil, and I don't think that sounds like a good idea. But if you've tried it and you've had success with those rubber mulches, I'd love to hear about it. In fact, if you have any comments or any questions, please let me know below. If you'd like to see more of these gardening videos, then subscribe to the Gardener Scott channel if you haven't already done so. And if you like this video, you can give me a thumbs up and share it. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.